Hello, podcast listeners. You are listening to JJ Meets World with our special guest, Adam Martin. This one's going to be pretty good. It starts off on a kind of morbid way. We talk about obituaries, but trust me, the second that we get into Adam's story, the F5 project, you are going to be hooked. So whether you live in Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo, or anywhere else in the world, you're going to love this episode of JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is! He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
When was the last time that you read an obituary for somebody?
Today.
So when you read an obituary, I know that from time to time people write their own. If someone has a terminal disease, they may write their own obituary. But for the most part, your obituary is being written by people who love you or people who knew you. I wonder what people would write in my obituary. Do you ever think about what people would write in yours?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the movie Waking Ned Devine?
Oh, yeah.
It's one of my favorite. So the premise of the movie is simple. A small town in Ireland, a resident, and we're talking a small town, like maybe there's 50 people in it. A resident wins the lottery, but has a heart attack and dies holding the ticket in his hand. And so the small town decides that they're going to claim the lottery prize, but to fool the man from the lotto, as they like to say, everyone in town has to pretend that one living person is Ned Devine, the guy who's dead. And so part of that is they have the real Ned Devine's funeral and the lotto man shows up. So they pretend that the funeral is for the guy who's pretending to be Ned Devine. And I remember there's a moment where he says, how grand it would be to attend your own funeral and to see the women who cry and mourn for you and to hear what your friends have to say about you. And I think about that from time to time. I've given I've said a few words at some funerals, and I'm always honored when somebody asks me to do that. I usually try and include a little bit of humor with it because I've never been asked to speak at a funeral of someone who I think is so stoic that they wouldn't enjoy it.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe an agent's in the crowd.
Yeah.
Like maybe they were connected to someone.
I'm always on, man. I'm always on. But let's say the obituary is, J.J. Gordon, born October 10th, 1983, died October 4th, 2025. What do you say in that? Born to JD and Patty Gordon, and how do you sum up a person's life in 3 paragraphs?
Well, I think I know a way to actually answer your question.
Oh, yeah?
But it might be a long road ahead.
Okay.
We'll find out.
Is a podcast impresario?
No. I would think that if you could become famous enough to that where news stations would have a pre-made
like a
obit
roll
for you, and then all we need to do is put a rumor out there that you died, and some news station will release their pre-made obit, and then surprise, and then you just read it and make sure and see what they say about you.
How bad do you think those celebrities feel when someone's like, I thought you died 5 years ago?
Oh my, yeah.
Or, the people who have the fake death hoaxes that take place.
But imagine the opposite side of that, the person who you thought your friend was dead for 5 years, and then you see them at a farmer's market.
Like, oh, what?
Sure, what?
There was a great Saturday Night Live bit from the Dana Carvey years where he was playing Tom Brokaw. And the premise was Tom Brokaw wanted to take the whole summer off and go to Barbados. And so they had to have him record every possible story intro. And so it was, Gerald Ford died today at the age of 76. And they're like, all right. And Gerald Ford take 2. And he goes, Gerald Ford died today at age 76 after being attacked by wolves. They're like, all right, the third, and he keeps going, and they get more ridiculous. Like he goes, Gerald Ford was abducted by aliens today, and we all hail our new leaders from Grip Grop. And he goes, well, that's never going to happen. He goes, you don't know. Do you know that, Tom? And he goes, you're right. You're right. He goes, Gerald Ford died today, and I'm gay. And he goes, now, come on. I know that's what's going to happen. He goes, wait, you want MSNBC to get the scoop on that one? And I always think there must be people who've pre-written stories so that the second they hear a whisper of a celebrity dying, they're ready to go with that story immediately.
Well, I actually happen to know a few people in town here that are a member of a group, celebrity death pool, which we spoke about on episode 8, had Mike and Val, I think. And, that's a group of people who I've seen their emails between each other when there's just a hint out there in the media that someone may have died. I mean, they jump on that like a pack of piranhas. And I would give it a 50-50 chance that later that day, they'll be like, oh, no, they're still alive. Eddie Murphy's still alive. That was a hoax.
Yeah, and everyone is sort of put up on that pedestal. And you'll see an actor or actress who hasn't been, respected in the last couple of years or hasn't done much. And all of a sudden, they'll be like, Dabney Coleman, dead at 88. People will be like, oh, Dabney Coleman was my favorite. Be like, screw you. You haven't talked about Dabney Coleman since that day we had to watch 9 to 5 at the lake. You have not mentioned him. And so I guess, where I'm kind of going for on this is our guest today on the show is going to have a really amazing obituary because he's changing the world. And so how do you sum that up in 3 paragraphs? And you folks are going to understand immediately what I'm talking about because our guest today, Adam Martin, is changing the world. And not in the way that I say, I'm changing the world because I'm cutting back on the amount of straws I'm using, but changing the world in the fact that at this point, with a very, very short amount of time, he has already changed the lives of thousands of people, directly hundreds, and then through their networks, thousands outside of that. And he's got a long road ahead of him.
Luckily he's a young man, so it's dark to say what is his obit gonna say, but I totally get what you mean. This is a guy who how it's not often in our society, and I know I am guilty of it myself. I get upset about all sorts of different problems in the world, but what do I do about it? Nothing, really. I might go and make a Facebook status update where I'm snarky and get into an argument with some conservative family members or something like that. But I'm not I'm selfish enough to never have been driven to really try to right a wrong. And Adam is really trying to do that by working to break the cycle that felons, people who become labeled a felon in our society, are almost never able to break through on their own.
And he gets into a metaphor about being a felon and being disenfranchised from the rest of society that hit home to me. And I've heard his story many times before, but hearing him tell it in this is something special. He words it in a way I'd never heard of before. And obviously he's hitting a nerve because he's respected by business people. The people that he is vouching for are now respected by business people. And it's a real shame that it had to take something like this for people to give a second glance or to realize like, oh, hey, I've been completely wrong. I've been judging a group of people that I've never even met. In fact, it's odd. Before Adam started the F5 project, he wrote a note on Facebook about my improv troupe, the Linebenders. And he said, I've been talking shit about a group of people for years without ever actually seeing them perform live. And I saw them tonight, and I'm the first person to tell you I was absolutely wrong. And if you have an opportunity, you should go see them. And I remember being just blown away by the fact that someone would say that and be so kind with something like that. And that kindness is something that when you look at Adam, he's got grizzly beard and he wears shirts that say, you know, like hustle.
It looks like he's about to open a brewery.
Yep, exactly. But he is truly one of the kindest and most forgiving people that you're ever going to meet. He's an amazing person. Just an amazing person. Like, I want to go. We just finished our interview with him, and I want to go out and change the world in some way. And he'd be the first person to tell you, go do it.
Yeah.
You don't need $1 million. You just need to go out there and do it. Actions speak louder than words. So we've primed the pump at this point. Sit back, enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World with our special guest, Adam Martin from the F5 Project.
JJ Meets World.
Welcome to JJ Meets World. Our guest here, Adam Martin. Now, Adam, before we get going, Tucker was trying to big time me and be like, hey, listen, I arranged a special guest and he's a big mover and shaker. And he was laying down all these things. He didn't even say you by name. And then all of a sudden he's like, so we've confirmed Adam Martin. I'm like, Adam Martin! Oh, this will be great. And I think I took some of the billow out of his sails.
Nice. Yeah,
I can confirm that
we
story
go way
is
back.
completely false.
It's true.
I texted him and I said, Adam Martin, 4 p.m. And
No,
he goes,
but what did you tell me?
Adam Martin!
What did you tell me the week before that you were trying to line up?
I didn't know his name, and he runs like this recovery program. I couldn't remember off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
he was like, he's like, it's going to be a big deal.
just
He's
some
like, you
guy.
better get your research together as a host,
yeah.
and you'll
we got
embarrass
some
yourself.
guy who's doing what the rest of us are doing, is like living a normal life.
Okay, so Adam, first and foremost, let's talk about what people lately are seeing you doing in the news, social media, the F5 project.
Yeah.
So tell us what it is.
So F5, it stands for the refresh. It's like the refresh key on your keyboard. It's a theory that what would happen if we applied grace unlimited to someone's life when they're coming out of jail and prison. The other, it stands for I have 5 felonies. So its purpose is to help people with reentry. In North Dakota, there's really no reentry plans. You just get let out of prison. They say good luck. It's kind of like playing Tetris on level 46 when you've never played the game before. And then, so we provide some housing and some employment opportunities. One goal I want is a unlimited transportation. So like you get out of prison and you can just ask for someone for a ride to a job or meet with your probation officer and stuff like that. So think of like empowerment for people coming out of prison is really what it is. Fargo houses, Bismarck houses, Devil's Lakes houses, with the thought that everybody who works for F5 has been formerly incarcerated and they know what it's like. We've tried hiring people who don't have felonies on their record, and they usually last about 2-3 months, either because they feel out of place or they don't feel like they have anything to offer, which is not true. They have a lot to offer, but I think there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. And the empathetic approach is always way better, especially when you have experience. So right now, everybody who works at F5 is a felon.
That old saying of like, gosh, I know what you're going through. These people actually do know what an individual is going through at that time. I've been following you a lot since this project started, and it started very grassroots. I mean, very, very grassroots. Do you remember the day that you decided something needed to change?
Well, I think deep down, I've been a felon for a long time, and I know what it's like to apply for a job when people tell you that they'll look past your background and then they interview you and then they tell you that they don't hire felons. It doesn't seem like anyone's on the same page. I know what it's like to apply for housing and be denied, or even apply for housing where they charge you for an application fee of $35 and it's the only $35 you have, and then they deny you because you're a felon, even though they told you they would look at it. You know what I mean? Like I have a feeling that they never intended, they just wanted my money.
Oh, wow.
I know what that feels like. So, when I started becoming successful in the tech world, getting hired by one of the local tech firms and doing sales and marketing and stuff, a lot of my friends seem to hit a glass ceiling, a very, very low glass ceiling in their financial capacity when it came to working and making money. And to be honest, like even my boss at that time was like, listen, you can provide a service and we want to hire you. You know, there wasn't any magic moment there. It wasn't like he was like, I'm going to hire a felon. But I seized the opportunity and became successful pretty fast. Got a car, got a nice place to live, and it all involved money, right? And so if you look across, you know, I guess the United States, even with the people that I know or the stories that I've heard, it takes money to become successful, right? If you want to have a better house, if you want to have a better car, if you want to get out of the trap house, if you want to not have to rely on drug dealers or whatever, right? And that company provided that for me. And I worked there for 4 years, and it got pretty lonely, right? Like most of my friends, you know, I was constantly in airplanes, like flying to Denver and Seattle and a lot of other places to like do business and stuff. And it felt like not that I had grown out of my current network of friends, but they just didn't identify with me anymore. You know, like I sold out. And one day I got asked to speak at this event and talk about who I was, right, in front of 800 professionals in the community. And my life completely changed, right? Everyone has someone in their life who suffers from addiction or alcoholism or is incarcerated or something, and they don't know what to do. So that they were constantly reaching out to me, what do I do, you know? And I'm like, I don't know, be a mom, right? Like a mom without expectations, you know, or be a dad that doesn't have to punish, you know, even in the way that you talk, right? And giving the cold shoulders just because someone's not doing what you want them to do, you know? And I went to my boss and I told him, I was like, listen, I'm going to give you a year and then I'm going to go try and start something. I don't even know what it is, but I'm going to try. Like, I'm just going to wing it. And I lasted about 3 months. And I just got so angry that like people who were successful and executives and CEOs or city officials just weren't taking me seriously. And so I was like, fuck it, I'll just do it and see what happens. And we started with a house, and then we had a second house, and then a third, and then a fourth, all the way up to 7 houses. And they were all filled with people who would have been homeless had we not been there. And our recidivism rates, you know, the people who are going back to prison after, you know, coming out within a year, dramatically decreased because we provided opportunities and resources that weren't there before, instead of punishing them, like continuing the punishment, right? You served your time, but now you have to be labeled as a felon for pretty much the rest of your life. So how, like, you know, getting a DUI, a felony DUI is a life sentence now. You know, it may not be in prison, but it definitely is when it comes to working and having a nice place to live and whatever. So I'd say probably a year and a half ago, it just snapped. I just got angry and I tried to start something, and it grew way faster than I anticipated.
Well, that's great to see, right? That so many people are getting involved in this. I know, gosh, right off the bat, there were a huge number of people who got in your corner immediately, and that had to feel good, and that had to be a great acknowledgement to what your ideas were. But you've also done a grassroots effort on this too. I remember seeing posts on Facebook of, hey, this person needs a ride. Who can pick up this person? They just need a ride. Yeah. And so you're talking about huge big picture items like homes that people can transition in and out of, all the way down to just getting someone a ride from point A to point B. Or I think I saw one too where this person just needs a suit coat. They're going in for an interview and they need a suit coat. So let me ask you this. Why are we not preparing individuals to leave the system?
It's a complex. There's a lot of variables there.
Actually, let me further with this. Is there any state or county that you have heard of that has a pretty good model put together, or is this more of a universal problem?
I would say it's different in every state and every county, right? So here we may have, let's just say hypothetically, 1,000 people released in a year, right? Well, that's way low compared to California. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you think in terms of like business, right, supply and demand, the supply of people coming out of prison is an insane amount of number. So the demand is very high, but then when you look at like housing and employment, like they're not ready for them. The infrastructure grew so fast in the prison industry that that we just weren't ready for it. Think of it this way: when the oil boom happened in North Dakota, there was a huge need for technology, right?
Yep.
And infrastructure and road infrastructure and all that stuff. But the oil was so big and so like booming that a lot of the stuff that came to be built for it came years later, right? And so I think that we're in a position now in America where we're starting to realize that there's a really big problem, right? It was kind of just left alone. We let it grow, and then it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, now I think it's to the point where every person in America can identify someone that they have in their family or close friend network that's been incarcerated, right? And so it's different now. It used to be where you didn't think about it because you didn't know anybody, kind of like AIDS, right?
Yep.
I didn't know, there was a lot of people who didn't know someone with AIDS, and maybe because they weren't outspoken about it or whatever, but you don't tend to deal with things that you don't have to deal with, right? And so it's different now. I haven't seen anybody that's outside of a grassroots movement, like a county or a state, really do something that's awesome for reentry other than North Dakota. It's happened in the last 6 months, right? They came out with this thing called Free Through Recovery because they identified that most of the people who were being locked up in North Dakota were drug or alcohol related, right? So they wanted to provide like peer support and basically F5 on a grand scale, right? And get them connected as they're coming out of prison or if they're on probation, which is it's a game changer. It's really awesome. Pam Sagnas and Leanne Birch and some of those higher ups on human services and the DOCR, they've identified that, and it's happening. And I don't think that anybody in any other state is doing anything similar to it. So if anything, North Dakota is actually, it's interesting because it's like having a big ship that can be manipulated, like the controls can be manipulated by a few people. It's small enough to where you can move the ship at any moment's notice. Where California, Washington, these huge states with lots of people, whenever they want to make a change, it takes years and years and years to do it. So it's been interesting watching North Dakota because we can actually probably technically be a pilot program for anything and see it work on a smaller scale. And this seems to be working. We've already gotten the numbers back, and recidivism rates statewide is going down, both directly because of F5 and the state.
I know that we live in a state that has, for whatever reason, shrugged off the unemployment problem that a lot of states dealt with through the recession. And everywhere you look, everyone's hiring, but there still is that asterisk at the end. And they're cutting themselves off from a great number of people who would be excellent employees for them and just need to be given that fair shake. Not even a second chance, just given the opportunity. Right. That's all it is an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
I've spoken about this before, but both of my parents were alcoholics. And when my mom finally decided to take her addiction seriously, she was in the last 6 years of her life, and it wasn't a smooth road even after that. She would get a 1 year, 2 year chip, and something would set her back. But then it's just the first day again, and it's the second day and the third day. And my mother was a person of means, but she still spent nights in jail. And I remember seeing her in an orange jumpsuit. And I think, to me, you hit on a good point, which is everybody, you don't have to scratch very far down from the surface to find somebody who has dealt with drugs, alcohol, been incarcerated for whatever reason. And boy, oh boy, do those addictions not just affect the person themselves, but it's the children and the parents, and then there's enablers who can be a part of this equation. And it's a much wider community, but for whatever reason, we shy away from talking about it. It's almost like saying addiction is a dirty word. And so maybe that is a piece of this puzzle as well, right? It's acknowledging addiction, and if someone who's never had it be a part of their life to just understand about the disease itself, maybe all of a sudden you can create some more compassion and some empathy. You would never not hire somebody because, I was going to say because they could get pregnant, but there are douchebag businesses out there who won't hire women because they might be starting a family. But you would never not hire someone because they have glasses, right? And think like, oh, well, geez, we have
Unless
to use
you're
glasses.
the Air Force, but
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah. But even
There's
then,
reason
they're gonna
behind-
get they're gonna get desperate at one point.
Right.
I think you can fly a drone with glasses
Yeah.
these days.
You can
Yeah,
have
I think-
contacts.
I think you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Can you? So what do you want to see as the next step for F5? Where are your houses?
Most of our houses are in North Fargo, and then we have one in Bismarck, and we just opened one on the 1st in Devil's Lake. And
How do you get those?
oh, that's probably one of the reasons why we've grown so fast is we're not doing it the typical way that a nonprofit would, right? We find landlords willing to rent to F5, right, and let us be the property managers, you know. Even so, the difference is property managers would just take care of the properties. F5 is actually signing the lease. So regardless of who's in the house or their financial capabilities or whatever, we pay the rent every month. You know what I mean? Which property managers don't do that. And we've gotten in. This actually kind of pisses me off a little bit. But the housing industry has become very powerful, right? To the point that landlords, property managers, whoever, have the power to say yes or no to people having safe homes, right? We have these little homes over in this part of town that are probably really shitty, and you can live there if you want. But even though that the person might have the money and they even might have good credit because they have a felony background, we're not going to let you live with these good citizens. You know what I mean? And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that in felons are not a protected class. Addicts are, alcoholics are, you know, people of color are, handicapped people are, like across the board. There's a lot of protected classes, but felons are the one group of people that you can treat just like we did before the abolishment of slavery, right? Or even back in the 50s and the 40s when we didn't have equal opportunity. You know what I mean? Which a lot of that is still very relevant today as it has been before. But you can openly go to your Facebook and say, I do not rent to felons, and nobody's going to make a fuss about it. You know what I mean? Now imagine it had that person updated their Facebook saying, I do not rent to people of color, right?
Huge uproar.
It would be a huge uproar, right? There would probably even be some people who would join that person, but a lot of them would make a huge fuss about it because it's wrong, right? And so the only real difference between, like the TV show Orange is the New Black, right? Like it's very Roman when it comes to people who've been incarcerated and people who are in the state legislation or city commissions or of high status in our community, right? You can treat people poorly if they have a criminal record, right? And it's unfair. And so that's why we have such a huge influx of people coming into Fargo or coming back to Fargo. Let me clarify that. The people who are living in our houses have been and grew up in Fargo, right? They're not from, they didn't come here because of the oil boom. They were people who grew up here, who went to North High, went to South High. They grew up in Moorhead. You know what I mean? Like they are citizens and have been residents of Fargo-Moorhead for a very long time. And we're treating them as if they don't belong here. You know what I mean? And so there's just too much power there. And I would like to see that shift happen. And I think F5 is kind of a solution for that because we are property managers that empower people who are living in our properties, right? Because most property management companies or landlords just want your money. There's no benefit of living in their properties other than you get a place to live, and it may be a safe place to live. But at the end of the day, if you don't pay your rent, you're out, right? That it's just a money transaction. Where for us, the transaction's different. We pay the rent to the landlord. We have the relationship with the landlord. And then we try to create as many opportunities and be there for the people in our houses. Now imagine if that trend changed and property managers were asking you on a weekly basis, is there anything I can do for you since you're living in our place? Right? If I ran a technology business the same way that landlords and property managers run their business, I'd be out of business. Because I learned in the tech world, you have to build relationships. You have to be there for your customers. You have to go above and beyond your competition, right? But the thing is there's only a couple landlord or a couple owners in Fargo. It's almost a monopoly. You know what I mean?
It is a monopoly. I mean, let's face it. A single entity controls a super high percentage of the rental property in this town.
Yep.
And I don't hear a lot of people say great things about them. We all have our own opinions. Mine are probably in line with yours, Adam.
Talking about Silver Scratch?
Yeah, that'd be the one.
Silver Scratch Properties?
And
fuck those guys.
What I hear from you is like somebody who's owned property before is, wait, hold on. You're telling me that you guys are going to rent my property and pay me every month, whether or not all the bedrooms are filled?
Yes.
Yeah, sign me up for that.
So, let's backtrack a little bit. A lot of those owners have been put in a position where, it's like an employer trying to hire someone who's been. Why is Adam and the F5 crew so good at hiring felons? Because we know what it's like to be a felon, right? Why are doctors so good at teaching people who want to be doctors? Because they have the experience and the knowledge of what they're about to endure. Most, I would say 99, probably almost 100, probably 100% of the property managers and landlords have never been locked up, right? And so they don't know how to rent to felons. They don't know how to apply the grace that's needed for them. So we're a good F5. A lot of those companies, even the ones that we kind of mentioned, are changing, right? For instance, like the way we treat our housing is if you rent from us from 4 to 6 months, you're building credit, right? You may not be building credit with the credit bureaus and stuff, but you are building credit with the people that we have relationships with. So I'm batting 1,000% right now of the people who have transitioned into our houses, who made it 6 months and then wanted to transition into a regular apartment with one of the big dogs out in the community, right? And because they want to know that they're going to get their money, right?
Yep.
And I've been able to prove to them, this guy lived with us for 6 months. Now, as a business, you have a 9% vacancy rate on the south side, right? Even if it's 6 months out of the year that person signs a contract with you to live with you, that's better than no money.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Yep. Something is better than nothing. An empty room is costing you money.
Exactly. And so when I presented to him, I was like, listen, so the property managers were like, yeah, we'll rent to you and then you take care of the property. We're basically just collecting a check. You know what I mean? And then, so they gave it a try and they're like, holy shit, our properties are getting better. F5 came in and painted the house. They fixed the drywall. They did a lot of the things that we don't want to do because it costs money, right? But the thing that's awesome about F5 is the labor talent or the labor pool of people that are coming and living in our houses. I don't have to contract. You know what I mean? They work for free with me to do some of the work in the houses. So it saves us money, saves the landlord money, saves the owner money. You know what I mean? And then when it gets to, then they get to build this money credit and they're like, those companies are like, yeah, we'll take them. Because that's what they really needed, right? They needed a better filter.
Yep.
Because their filter before was applications and they were basing it on what was seeing in front of them. Now when they go apply, they bring to them a bunch of Facebook pictures, right? Of them volunteering in the community, of them hanging out with F5 people, of them, with references from AA or NAs of sponsorship and saying they've been going to, you know what I mean? It's just a better, and so that's what I really wanted to do is like, if I was going to start up a company, like a legitimate, like 100% like technology company, the only way that I'm going to make this better is if I'm better than the next guy, right? And so when a guy goes in and applies for an apartment, and then another guy who has no felonies applies for an apartment, and they're automatically going to be unbalanced, right? They're going to rent to the guy that doesn't have a felony because he may be lower risk. You know what I mean? But he doesn't have any rental history, right? And so I was like, well, what happens if we can raise the bar a little bit, because this guy actually has rental history now, but he has a felony? Well, now it's balanced the scales. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the goal. Like, this all came to be months after we started. We had no intentions of starting housing whatsoever. I didn't really want to, but it's the one thing out of all the pillars that need to be implemented or resources into someone's life that will have the most dramatic change, is being able to lay your head somewhere safe and not having to worry of what's going on in the world.
It's too bad that we have this one word felon that covers so many different types of people, right? So you hear someone is a felon, but your work is just beginning as far as getting to know that person. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that person was violent or did anything that was really bad, or that's even a mark on their actual character as a human being. I mean, to become a felon, that could mean so many different things, but we just have this one word that we just use because for whatever reason, we've developed a culture where we're fine with having a justice system that's pretty much only punitive, and we don't care that it creates a cycle that just feeds itself and doesn't actually help anyone that it punishes in any way.
Well, in the defense of the government and they did what the people wanted, right? The government was put in place to basically create mass changes because there's so many people in America that there was things that needed to be done to keep America going, right? What was the one thing that we had back in the early days of America that we don't have today? Slavery. We don't have slavery anymore, but it's called economic slavery, right? We needed a bottom tier of people or workforce to keep the economy going and profitable and capitalism being in its prime, right? So when the 13th Amendment passed, right, when it was abolishing slavery, basically said, you can't treat people like that anymore. And then there was a little subsection which said, unless they're a criminal, right? This is why you see prison industries of workforces in the prison only getting paid $1 or $3 a day versus a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, right? Because the only way you can get more profit is if you cut your cost. And so there's I mean, even in North Dakota, right? There's companies that build furniture and they make license plates, all these things that are in dramatic need to keep America going, right? Are getting super, super low paying jobs. You'll never find anything like that in the community because nobody would let a citizen of not having felonies on their background ever endure that.
Sure.
But someone who's be considered lower class, it's not that big a deal. They deserve it.
And of course, we're talking about a country that has plenty of privately funded, privately run and owned prisons.
Yeah.
That actually their bottom line depends on how many people they can get into a building.
Yeah.
And that kind of money can help perpetuate things too, like, what do you need to do to get a large population of people imprisoned? You got to make it really easy to imprison them. You got to make it really easy to find a way to say, well, you're a criminal now, so you need to go behind these bars.
Yeah. I think there was a lot of things that started off that were supposed to be good, right? The war on drugs with Reagan was supposed to be a good thing for America. But the worst thing that ever happened to America is it filled its states with people, right? And those people are flawed. And we left decision-making to a very flawed group of people, which is everyone. We're all flawed, right? We all have very subjective views when it comes to anything. You tell me what this globe in the center of this table looks like, we're going to give 3 different answers, right? Because we all see 3 different sides of it, right? And so when Reagan said, war on drugs, let's lock up the drug dealers and stuff, and then it's sent to the cops, and then the cops, the only people they come in contact with are drug addicts, right? They're not locking up the dealers. Every once in a while they get some kingpin or whatever, but once you cut the head off of a snake, another one appears. You know what I mean? The demand is still going to be there. Addiction is still there, right? So we filled our prisons up dramatically. 2 million people within 40 years of people who have drug addictions, right? And then they became felons, and then they got out and they couldn't have normal jobs, which was perfect for the McDonald's and the car washes and all that stuff, because those needed to be fulfilled, and they weren't being fulfilled by people of the younger generation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if anything, this war on drugs kept America going. You know what I mean? And that's why you're going to find a lot of people in high places that are against any kind of reform, because if we reform it and people stop being felons, we're going to lose our labor pool.
What, other than housing and work, what are some other things that when somebody walks out of jail and they have a felony, do they instantly find that they are excluded from, or that they're allowed to be segregated from?
Well, I would say just the fact that they're a felon segregates them anyway, right? We've done a good job branding with the media and with TV shows and whatever, right? Imagine, imagine if there was a media or branding going out there that if you owned an iPhone, you were a lower class of person, right? I have an iPhone. Now I've identified with that statement, right? It's been fed into me. Now I feel less than everyone else. And the first thing that I want to do is go and get a Droid, right? Because I don't want to be identified as worse than someone else. And so, I mean, that's how marketing works, right? We're going to market to you that we have the best stuff, and if you don't have it, you're not the best kind of person. Yeah. Well, the problem with that scenario is when I go try and get a Droid, they see I have an Apple phone and they don't give me a Droid, right? Now I'm coming out into the community with the branding that I'm a felon. It doesn't matter if people treat me differently. America has made me known that I'm different and that I don't deserve, right? That I don't deserve the good things in life, And so we spend a lot of time just speaking life into people in the jails and the prisons that you are worthy, you are worth it. It doesn't matter what other people think of you. If they say no, that's good. Then they're not worth your time. Move on to the next thing. The problem is that we're dealing with addicts and alcoholics who are extremely sensitive people. You know what I mean? So you combine that branding with that sensitivity, you just give up, right? And you go back to the thing that makes you feel good, because that's what everybody, even in this room, this dog too, wants to feel good. Everybody wants to feel good. And when you constantly feel like shit all the time, you're going to go back and look for the thing that made you feel good. I think people like overeaters can identify with that, right? Or drug addicts, of course, or gamblers or whatever. They all get that feeling inside them that they feel good and intense and awesome. And when you don't have drugs, you don't have alcohol, you've been tagged as a felon, the community has stigmatized you, you're living in a homeless shelter. It's a wonder why, we don't have more suicide rates versus people just committing felonies by holding drugs. You know what I mean? Because deep down, in every one of us, like I said, we want to feel good. I would even make the argument that people who commit suicide are looking for something better. You know what I mean? I have a few people in my family. I've had people in our houses that have moved on that have done it because they get into, there's one trend, to answer your question, JJ. There's one trend across every industry that is successful, and every group and every organization, every community is the inclusive nature of helping people, right? Having them be a part of your network, including them into your tribe, right? Feeling like you're a part of a community and not the black sheep of the community. Every person that I've ever met that's been successful in recovery, been successful in business, been successful in church or whatever, and success is different in every one of those things, right? But someone included them. Someone opened up the circle of people, right, and didn't block them out, but turned one foot to the side and let someone in and made them a part of their group. Every single one of those guys who felt that they were included got that feeling of what it was like to hit 21 on the blackjack, what it felt like when they put a needle in their arm, right? It might not have been as dramatic as those things felt like, but it was a sense of belonging instead of being the sick one in the herd that's left behind.
My mom used to tell me that when she was trying to quit drinking and it had caused all these situations with her sisters and, and our family, so that it's trying to run a marathon while you have the flu. You already feel like shit. You look like shit. But people are expecting you to run, was it 26.2 miles while you are feeling like that? And that was an eye-opener for me because I thought, oh, yeah, I mean, you're already, you know, whether you're kicking yourself while you're already down, all you need from me is to say, like, I'm here. I'm here. You're a part of our family, and let's keep going. How can I help you without enabling you? But how can I help you? How can I keep you as part of this family that we have here?
I'd take it a step further too. When the Boston Marathon was men only, right? And there was that woman, and I hate the fact that I can't remember her name right now, and it's it's relatively new information to me of the history of the Boston Marathon. But there was a woman, there was no women allowed. It was a men's thing, and the woman signed up for it, but she signed up in a way where it didn't disclose what her gender was.
Right, like her name was Terry or something like that.
And they let her in, and when she took off her hoodie or whatever it was and she started running, men started attacking her and pushing her around, right? That's not only are people feel like they're sick, but they've been branded that they're not welcome to even participate in something as simple as a marathon. You know what I mean? So if life is a marathon, it's the Boston Marathon when women were not allowed. You know what I mean? That's how I feel what it's like to be a felon in America.
So who's, you know, we're not obligated to say names or not, but I want to know who's doing who's hiring right now. Who said it doesn't matter that you're a felon or not? We're gonna bring you in.
There's some game changers out there that they're really, you know, and even with the people that are saying that they're hiring, there's two different classes there, right? There's the class where we don't really care about you as a person. We just want you to do a job. And I think those are icky cultures. Nobody wants to work in that kind of environment. But companies like, you know, a lot of construction companies, Wanzik, Industrial Builders, you know, Roars Development, you know, they have good cultures and they're willing to hire people that have felony backgrounds. You know, Solid Comfort is a big one. They have a very recovery-centric culture there, where if you need time to like go to an AA meeting or you need time to go meet with a treatment counselor while you're supposed to be at work, go do it. You know what I mean? Because we want you at your best. You know, High Point Networks hired me. I'm a felon. I don't know if they've hired any since. You know, it might have just been an anomaly.
You'd hope so, because it sounded like it was pretty successful.
Yeah, it was. You know. But even like F5 Venture, you know, the for-profit side of the House for F5 project, you know, it's all felons, right? Because, you know, there's in this world that we're living in right now, there is a lot of technology-specific companies, right? And that's a really awesome thing to know that technology is booming and there's companies starting up everywhere. But the problem is most people who are really skilled at technology are not very good at sales, right? And some of the best sales guys that I've ever met are ex-drug dealers. You know what I mean? And so they know how marketing works. They know how networking works. They know that it takes a lot of hustle to continue to hit the phones and send out emails. And, you know, and so I was like, well, what happens if we start a company that's sales and marketing for technology companies? And oh my God, dude, it's just grown very fast. You know, the people like the stories. They like the impact that we're trying to create opportunities for people, but they also like the fact that they got some of the best sales people representing their companies, and it's low risk for them because in their minds, right? I think it's kind of facetious, but in their minds, like I get the opportunity to hire a hustler, but he doesn't have to work at my building. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So they see us taking all the risk by having him work in our facilities. But dude, I love going to work.
How many people can say that, really?
Yeah, I love it, man. Felons have the best stories of anyone that I've ever met, or alcoholics or addicts, right? You know, like my story of like one time I blacked out and I woke up in Omaha, Nebraska with a bunch of Amish people. Thought I joined them. You know what I mean? And it was in a bus line. And it was like, I thought I was traveling with them because I had no memory of what had happened the 24 hours before, you know? But I was like, whatever. I mean, I've never done this. And there's stories like that across the board. And I just love it. And I think it if there's anything, if there's any skill that felons have, it's high emotional intelligence, right? Because they've been in front of courts and cops and social workers, and they've been taken out of their homes and put in foster homes and put in prisons. And so they're constantly around people. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so when you put them on the phones and they can do in a couple minutes what it takes some sales guys months to do, like it's just super intriguing to our clients. And so it's growing very fast. So if there's anything that if anyone ever has any questions, you know, wherever this podcast goes, you know, I'm sure the guys will make my information available. If you ever have questions as an employer, just call. I don't charge for that. Like my goal is that I want you to be ready and engaging and build a culture for all people, not just the ones that fit your mold, you know?
So how about these city governments? I know that the last time I spoke to you in my other radio job, it was working to get past some of the nuts and bolts red tape that existed on the books, but we had a happy ending to that story, didn't we?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when, you know, I don't have any problems of naming people. We had a little issue with Dave Pepcorn on the city commission in Fargo. And what it was ignorance of what was really going on. I don't think that Dave is an ignorant person. I think he's got a really good heart. He's got a big heart for his city. And sometimes when things happen in the city that he doesn't know about, he might talk about it before he has the full idea of what's going on. I think that's pretty common in politics, actually, you know, even passing bills or laws that, you know, has 100 pages that you should probably be reading, and you maybe read the first 2 and then you just pass, you know, whatever. I'm not very a big fan of how things get passed and how many laws we have, but he did what someone who doesn't know what we're doing did, and he started talking about us on the media level, saying that F5 needed to shut down and they're full of rapists and murderers and where is this going on? I want to know where all the houses are and this and that, and like we had done something illegal. Right. And he was like, they have too many people in the houses and this and that. And it was really interesting because our F5 houses were right next to college houses. And the college houses were doing the same thing we were doing, except we didn't have any drugs and alcohol. You know what I mean?
Right.
The college houses had more cop calls to their houses. I mean, you take 5 houses, their 5 houses and our 5 houses that we had, and there was more cop calls. And I know because we only had 1. And it was because someone overdosed, right? It wasn't because they went out and were stealing bikes or cars or getting drunk or throwing trash cans into people's yards or, you know, whatever, right? Which normally happens in any kind of college house because it's filled with alcohol and drugs and girls and whatever, right? Maybe not all houses. I hate when people blanket, and I'm doing it right now. But so anyways, we were doing the same thing as our neighbors were. And we were being pointed out. And that should show you the stigma, you know, how much stigma there is with being a felon. They don't even want you to have an opportunity, right? And if there's anything that I would like to change in our city is changing the city code of how many people you can have living in a unit. Because right now you can have 3 non-family members living in a unit, even if it's a 9-bedroom house that's been classified as a single-family dwelling. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. 3 non-family members. So it's a perfect opportunity if you're Catholic and you have a ton of kids, you know what I mean? But if you are a bunch of college students that don't make much money and you're trying to rent out a house, legally, you can only have 3 non-family college students living together. Well, we know that's not true. They're not doing that. And so if anything, F5 was doing the same thing that the college kids were doing. And people were like, see, it's unfair. They're treating you differently than they even do with the college students. And I would take it a step further. I'm like, no, the college students may be doing what they're doing, but it's not right. You know what I mean? In the eyes of the city. What they're doing is being hustlers. You know what I mean? They're trying to get as many people living in the same house so they can offset their costs and go get a good education and make their lives better. The same things that we're trying to do. So if there's anything, I'd like to just change the city code so that college student and felon can be treated fairly and both have opportunities. It seems to be that if you don't come from some kind of means, that you don't get the same opportunities as everybody else. I know kids that are in 3rd grade that own iPads. You know what I mean? Not all kids can say that. But imagine living in a world where every kid had access to an iPad while they're in school. not produced by the school, but was made affordable that any family could buy it, or there was means to make it available. You know what I mean?
When I was in high school, I took high school French, to which I remember very little of at this point. But one of the things that the French government did is they provided every home a computer that had a basic internet access for what was like the French version of the internet at that time. So if you wanted to buy movie tickets, you could through this computer, and you couldn't surf the web the way you can on a modern day computer, but you could perform basic services. You could pay your utility bills, things like that. And I thought, well, isn't that a step in the right direction? Because lest we forget, the internet is a utility now. Yep. People need it. You need it to survive. And so I can't believe the last time I signed up for internet, they did a background check on me. And it wasn't just my credit. But they said, well, we want to make sure that you have a good rental history so that you don't skip out on the place that we've loaned this equipment. And I said, well, that's ridiculous. You either want me as a customer or you don't want me as a customer. Mm-hmm. And I could only imagine what it's like to have come out of prison, and 3 years have been going great. You've got a job, you've got some rights to your children back, and then all of a sudden you get denied for daycare because they don't want someone who's got a felony putting their kids in this daycare facility. And it'd almost be like going back to square one again. Mm-hmm. And having to start fresh. And you think, at what point have I paid my debt to society? Now, I don't know how you feel about that phrase, but that one has always bothered me, that you've paid a debt to society, because we don't ask them to pay a debt. We're asking them to forever be in debt.
Yeah. The same as a college student.
Yep.
Right? It's either, I used to say that I'm really super happy I didn't go to college.
Me too.
Yeah. Because I don't think that I could have afforded it or even really probably finished, because of how much you're asked to do while you're going to college, and then you have to get a job and then find a place to live. And, that's why people of means who can live with their parents while they're going to college or whatever, I think it would be nice if everybody could have that luxury, but it's just not going to happen. There's a lot of generational trauma and drugs and alcohol and families being ripped apart and stuff. But, it's just not going to happen. But I've always been grateful that I didn't go to college, because I'm a felon, right? And I would have had both sides. So you're either in college debt or you're in felon debt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It seems, and so the more you dive deeper into it, it doesn't matter where you come from. Debt is a real thing. You know what I mean? If you want to have a successful life, it's like, how much debt do you want to take, right? Whether it's a car loan or it's a house loan or it's a whatever, you know what I mean? Here's an interesting thought. We have enough homes in Fargo, or places that people can live, that everybody in Fargo could have a place to live. There would be no homeless people, right? And I think, to go back to the for-profit prison industry, like that was one of those things that I think started off good, because this is going to blow your mind. I'm a felon, and I like the idea of a for-profit prison system, right? For a couple reasons. I think that if the incentives were different, it would create competitiveness on who can rehabilitate more people rather than punish them.
Sure.
Right? This is why when Pepsi came, or Coke came out, Pepsi came out, right? And it lowered the prices of Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Right? When gas stations came out, it lowered the prices. My hope is that when the for-profits prisons started happening, it was like, that would be awesome if the incentives were, how much money can that for-profit prison create based off incentives of empowerment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it wasn't. It was created on punishment and how long we can keep people in prison.
Do you think it's possible to come up with that incentive system when, say, the incentive of any potential customer at any private business is to spend as little money as possible? So if the incentive is, well, we're only going to charge the federal government, this much money to send their prisoners here, isn't the federal government then incentivized merely to send prisoners where it costs them the least versus the rehabilitation? Do you think it's possible to create a double-sided better incentive so that it happens in a certain way?
Yeah, I think that you're spot on. That's why it is the way that it is, because the government was looking for the lowest bidder, right? Because the government has to pay for their stay, which is not necessarily true, because a lot of the guys in there, they'll be like, you get free cable television, you get free meals, no, they don't. They have to work. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's why they don't make much money, because they're taking all of their money. Now imagine like the way that the prison system is. Now imagine if the rest of America, because that's the way America's going, right? Is they're going to tax you to death. They're going to try and take as much money from you as they can. Well, the prison system is the epitome of what it looks like when the government has full control of your life. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And they take all of your money except for $1 a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they deserve it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's only a matter of time before the government realizes that they have the American people in their back pocket. You know what I mean? And they're going to keep taking more and more and more from us. So if anything, if we could create a system in the prison system first on what it looks like to create incentives for having more money for the more success people are when they get out, right? Because it isn't so much the problem is in the prison, it's in the community.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
The community is not welcoming people back to their communities. Maybe we create the incentives with the city.
Yeah.
Right? How many people, how many residents have came back to you and found jobs and found this and found that, and then incentivize the residents, not the government. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that's where the money goes it goes to the city. Right?
Got it.
Comes from the feds, goes to the city, and they create incentives, right? But the city really, at the end of the day, has nothing to do with the empowerment of people in their communities.
Right.
They have empowerment when it comes to the businesses. You know what I mean? So what if we change that? And they're like, "Wow, that's socialism." That's automatically where they go to is it's socialism. You're creating. You're basically
use one word to generalize, and so you don't have to actually meet the burden of the idea itself. Yeah.
But I would argue that it's not socialism as much as capitalism in the home. You know what I mean? Or in the local community. You know what I mean? Yeah. Now I think capitalism is great, right? Because it basically says I can define my future. By the amount of effort and attitude that I put into day-to-day things. Now imagine if that same mentality was treated at the local level of neighborhoods. What can we do to make our neighborhood better? We have felons living in our community. What would it look like if we were incentivized to make their lives better? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it costs $40,000 to $76,000 to lock them up, right? Well, if there's community members that are engaging that felon, right, and helping him make his life better, and now he's paying taxes and he's buying cars and he's whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's 1,000 people in 1 year that just came back to our community that are now paying taxes.
Right.
We should be incentivizing the residents and the citizens of Fargo for creating opportunities, not just the businesses and the agencies and whatever.
Do we have any kind of those programs in the state of North Dakota where businesses get a tax incentive for having X number of folks with a felony on their record employed?
Yep, it's a federal government does that, where they do like a tax break of $7,500 a year, I think, per felon that you have employed that's been released within 30 days of their employment.
Okay.
We've utilized it, right? And it's a cool tax break or whatever. But I mean, if your felon's working for you, they're making money for you, right? Yeah. Every job should be profitable to some extent. Otherwise, then why are you hiring them for that position unless it's creating some kind of profit? You know what I mean? That's the point of owning a business and capitalism, profit, So you get an additional $7,500 tax break at the end of the year for hiring anyone who's been released to you.
I have a separate question that's more of a long-term in the future one that I didn't think I would be asking at all today with this context, but when you spoke earlier about the idea of cheap or nearly free labor, right? Basically, making a classification of people. I need to get new ones for these. Those microphones fall out all the time now, but a classification for people to handle like cheap labor, right? I'm paraphrasing some of the numbers here, but we stand to lose in this country probably over the next 10 years a very large amount of cheap labor positions to automation, because those actually end up being even cheaper depending on the industry and whatever because of that. And I'm interested to see what you think, what kind of an impact that would have on that the prison industry, the sort of class warfare that's going on that helps keep people down there. I kind of feel like that would actually give those big companies even more power, because now human labor has been cheapened even more. And so that there might be a point where even though automation is really cheap, you could get, it just cheapens the amount that you pay these people without actually reforming their system.
Yeah, you're speaking about a thing that definitely keeps me up at night, because we're in a point in the world where any job can be replaced by not just a robot, right, but automation, right, software, hardware. Now we have drones. We don't need pilots. Now we have technology that you can do, social media marketing where you can just update your status. And now you don't need a marketer, right? It's not that the jobs don't exist anymore. They're changing. Right.
But they're not changing it like a 1-to-1.
Right.
So like we're not, for like every job we lose, we're not getting one job to replace it.
Right.
And in certain industries, it's like 1,000-to-1, or depending on what's being automated.
It's like regular mail versus email.
Sure.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I get what you're saying. And I think that there's a lot of, like, I fear it, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm a business developer. I'm a sales guy, right? That's my background. And technically outside sales is becoming slowly obsolete. You don't really need it anymore, right? You can build a whole business off building a software and then making it available on Apple Store. You know what I mean? Or, Google Play or whatever, right? Yeah. Or if you have like a hardware, like a server or a network switch or something, you can just sell it on Amazon, right? Uber built a business of taxis and doesn't own any taxis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's where everything's going. And I've noticed that a long time ago, where the power isn't so much in the, going out and selling your product, it is building groups. You know what I mean? So Uber built a platform where they just built a group of people to go out and use their own vehicles, and they'll make sure they get paid. You know what I mean? It's just a money transaction. Basically, every business today is a PayPal. You know what I mean? And eBay doesn't have any products, but they sell them. You know what I mean? They're the largest sales company in the world. So to answer the question, yeah, I do fear that, because it says a lot about my for-profit business. Are they even going to be around, or what are they going to do in prison or whatever, right? But I don't think there's one thing that those things don't offer, and it's community, right? I'm always going to go back to community. No matter how far advanced we become with technology, you cannot reproduce or automate a hug. You can't automate a human touch. You can't automate love, right? You can't, you can, but it's fake, right? This is why people rely on porn. Or they rely on drugs, or they rely on, because they're not getting the things that we take so easily for granted when we have those things, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine that if all of a sudden I was locked up today and went 5 years without touching my girlfriend, Christy, just feeling her, you know what I mean? But that is normal in prison, right? Right now in Cass County Jail, they just deployed a platform for video conference instead of visitations.
Ooh.
You know what I mean? And it's crazy because the government and the city, and the county are like, this is awesome. This is going to say,
it's going to give more people opportunity.
Right. And it doesn't. Like they already took away the effect of where you had to talk to your kids through a glass window, right? Like, or you used to be able to hold your kids while you're in jail. Yeah, I fucked up, but at least I still get to hold my kids. You know what I mean? And it seems like we're segregating more and more and putting people in a smaller box so that they can't move. You know what I mean? Because I read on the Facebook update from the Cass County Jail, there was a comment from another jail saying, this is great news that you guys went video. We did it a couple years ago, and it's awesome because now we don't have to move the inmates anymore. You know what I mean? And so they created an immobile jail that you don't even have to leave your pod anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And eventually it's going to get to the point where you don't even have to leave your cell. Everything's going to be automated, right?
Yep.
I think that this is if there's anything in America that's destroying America, it's not just destroying the family, but it's destroying our communities because it's getting to the point where you don't even have to leave your house. You know what I mean? Or even when you leave your house, you're on your phone the whole time.
Yeah, you're not looking up. You're not. We're gonna try something on JJ. This is the beginning of something brand new, but I want to start a thing called 10,000 hellos, where I just stand on the street until 10,000 hellos are given out, and it might take through the rest of the year. But I was just in Chicago recently, and it used to be where you were among a sea of faces, and everyone was walking down the street, and you every now and then catch someone's eye, but you were looking forward. Everyone looks down now. Mm-hmm. Everyone looks down. They're looking at their phone. They segregate themselves by popping iPod or some earbuds in so that they don't have to, listen to somebody else say, sir, you dropped your wallet, sir. Anything like that. And to your point, I read recently about, I think it's in Utah, but there's a lawyer who's fighting the state of Utah because he feels that his clients aren't given a fair shake because they do the video conferencing in for arraignment hearings. And he said, you physically being in a courtroom gives you a voice.
Yep.
You are something that literally the judge could turn off or mute if they wanted.
Yep.
And without being
I've seen it happen.
Right?
Yep.
And so to me, that I say rah, good for that because I think it is important. And I'm sorry that it, quote unquote, inconveniences you to have to put these other human beings in a truck and bring them down for one of their last great rights, which is representing themselves in a court of law and having their moment to speak.
Yeah.
So
that's a big deal. I've said for a long time that, like the bail system, all that stuff is just completely corrupt. I don't like the fact that, and I know that Cass County is actually making some changes for that, right? They're creating community resource officers for people who they think will do well out in the community while they're in jail because they don't have work release anymore. They shut it down, right?
Really?
Yeah, and you used to be able to make money and pay rent to be in jail, which I think you should. Like if you're afforded to go out and work in the community, you should pay rent to where you're staying, right? But they shut it down because there was, I believe, drugs got into the jail, and they believe it came through work release. Right? They don't know for sure.
Yeah,
I'm not 100% sure about that as well, but they shut it down. So now they have community resource officers where they put a GPS bracelet on you so they can know where you're at all times, and but they let you out of jail. Right? That's better than nothing. Yeah, I will give them that. But it just seems that they're just, not all the video conferencing and all the they're letting you text your family members now from jail, right? And they're like, well, it's better for millennials and this and that. And I'm just like, I just feel like they're just taking more and more away and making it more automated for profit.
Yeah.
Right? Because technically now they don't have to transfer anybody to the courts. They don't have to transfer anybody to go visit. They don't have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so if they can just keep people in a room, and I'm going to tell you right now, all it's going to do is create more disruption. I said earlier that people who have been incarcerated are very high emotional intelligence. They're very insanely smart people, but they're also highly sensitive. And you keep taking more and more away from a dog and you put him in a kennel all the time, he's going to become aggressive. You know what I mean? And then this is where you'll see it with Rome when they kept they were killing slaves and they were making public mockery of them. They were letting gladiators fight for their freedom and then not give them the freedom. You know what I mean? They keep changing things like this to the worse. I'm not saying there's going to be a riot, but what I am saying is when you make a two-tier United States, the tiers are eventually going to fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I hope that it doesn't happen in our lifetime, but if things continue to go the way that they are, it's only a matter of time before the people pick up shovels.
I apologize, and I hope this doesn't rub you the wrong way, but the bulk of my knowledge of prison comes from Orange is the New Black or Shawshank Redemption. But in Shawshank Redemption, I think of when they release Brooks, who's the old man who's been in jail longer than he's actually been alive, and he's become institutionalized. And they put him outside of the gates and then shut them behind him. Mm-hmm. And then you watch his small part of the story where, you know, the world changed while he was in prison. And you think about this. Think about somebody who went to jail in 2008 and was released in 2018.
I have one in my house right now.
So
yep.
The world has drastically changed in that amount of time. Mm-hmm. And then you think of someone who had a 20-year sentence. The world has drastically changed. Heck, Neve Campbell was like the #1 actress when that person went away, and now she is maybe getting a bit part in a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie.
Yeah, and the amount of change isn't slowing down. So someone who's locked away for 5 years who just got out has probably, I'm generalizing, but the world has changed about the same amount of time as someone who had stayed in prison for the previous 20 years, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like there was a lot of change that happened in that 20 years, but then the 5 years after those 20 years was faster than all of that. Yep. And that's going to keep going. Yeah, that's not going to change.
I mean, you can look at, like, you know, I've seen the philosophy of business, right? Like, and with, you know, how many businesses have started in this time to even how successful they came. Facebook and Snapchat became $300 million, $500 million companies in a matter of years.
Yep.
Where it took, like, back in the day, it took IBM like 20 years to do that.
Yep.
Before that, it took Ford like 100, you know, whatever, right? Like it's happening faster, you know? And so I have one of the things that we do in our houses is like, let's sit down and just talk about the world. You know what I mean? Like what's available today that was not available when you went to prison? And they're like, well, I got this phone. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like when they went to prison, phones weren't even a thing. You know what I mean?
Right. Like the iPhone Generation 1 was just about to come out.
Yeah. Right. Or maybe they were iPods at the time, right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like they didn't have, you couldn't just, I remember when my dad came home with a bag phone. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I got to go through the process, like in the order that I can remember is the bag phone, then the Kyocera, then the Nokia, and then they started getting smart. You know what I mean? And
this one's got a full keyboard on it when I flip it open.
Blew my mind that I had a keyboard and I didn't have the T9. You know what I mean?
When there was an economy for ringtones.
Yeah.
Yes, I know.
Jeez.
So a lot of that stuff they didn't get to see. So when I say like people are coming out and playing Tetris on level 47 or whatever, like think of it this way. There's a bunch of people that are kicking ass playing Tetris, and then they look at a guy who picks up a Tetris game and they're like, why aren't you playing? Right? And they're like, I don't know what to do. Like there's a bunch of blocks and they're coming really fast and I'm supposed to put them in a certain area. But if you can play from a level 1 to level 47, like I don't know anyone who's going to actually make it to level 47. But I mean, you're getting mad at someone because they don't know how to play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? We've all had that kid, you know, or whatever. Like I grew up playing football at the playground. You know what I mean? And there was always that kid who didn't get picked, or there was that kid that didn't know how to play, but he wanted to play. And there's kids that include him, and there's kids that beat him up. You know what I mean? And I've never been the guy that beats up those kids. I've always been the guy that, as shitty as it sounds, feels bad for them and tries to get them included. But the game is so hard and the elbows come so hard that I fear that he'll even make it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, inclusion, not exclusion.
Yeah.
Right? Before we wrap this up, I want to talk about something that is not F5 related at all.
Pause real quick.
Ooh.
Just so you know, it's 5:12.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll have to go after this.
Cool.
Yep.
Awesome. Go ahead.
So when I first met you, it was through stand-up comedy. Do you ever think about doing that again?
Man, there's definitely a craving.
Yeah.
You should. This has easily been one of the funniest podcasts we've done.
Oh, your standards are pretty low. I'll tell you, I'll be completely transparent of why I left. One, let me say I love stand-up comedy. There was no greater feeling than making a crowd laugh, right? Continuously. I enjoyed the camaraderie. I enjoyed, being selected to participate. You know what I mean? Like it made me feel really good. The downside, I've talked to a lot of other stand-up comedians that are in recovery. Being in recovery and being in stand-up comedy is really hard.
Sure.
Right?
Just especially the nature of the venues.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that had I made it to the next level, I probably would have stuck it out because I wouldn't have had to have dealt with a lot of the stuff that I was dealing with. But being in recovery and hanging out in bars for 2 hours to do a 5-minute set just wasn't productive for me. And so it was really hard. So I gave it another shot and I made it about 9 months. I was 9 months sober and I was hanging out at the Pickled Parrot a lot and I was hanging out at Courtney's a lot. And I was slowly walking away from, the people that I was hanging out with that were in recovery. You know what I mean? And it wasn't on purpose or whatever. When you're not feeling good, you don't tend to hang out with people who are feeling good. You know what I mean? Nothing against the comics or whatever. I'm not saying that they're a darker nature group of people, but they.
Oh, they can be though.
Okay.
Yeah. That's all. That's fine.
Yeah. They enjoy, at least the comedians that I was hanging out with or the open micers. They were.
Stand-up comedy is a high-risk taking behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So
right.
there might be some crossover there.
Yeah, that's what I got out of it was, when you walk onto stage, you don't know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And I can see why people think that public speaking is the number one fear, because to this day, when I go before a crowd and speak or whatever, I get the heebie-jeebies. You know what I mean? I get the insane, my body is on fire right now. And then as soon as I tell that first joke, that's the moment. It's not the moment before I go on stage. It's not the moment when I first look at the crowd. It's when I tell that first joke and everything. It's kind of it's like when you hit Mach 1 or whatever, everything just quiets down. There's not a trouble in the world. I'm not thinking about how at the time I couldn't pay child support or how I didn't have a good job or nothing. It was Adam just making the world a better place for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I miss it. I miss the grind. I miss doing that stuff, but it was really hard for me to stay sober in that atmosphere. But I think I might have found my niche with public speaking, because now it's turned into just stand-up comedy, but stand-up comedy with a message. You know what I mean? And so it may not be joke after joke after joke like I used to do, but it's telling jokes while I'm telling a story and trying to get people to change their minds. So I kind of am still in it, but it's definitely different because I miss doing it in comedy clubs because people came there for a reason. Yeah. They came to laugh.
Well, maybe you could be the Johnny Cash of the prison world, and you could start going and doing sets there, in a jail. My
first comedy or my first stand up that I ever did was in jail.
Was it really?
That was where I tested the waters because people were telling me all the time. They're like, "You should get into stand up. You should get into stand up." And so one day, one of the other inmates was like, he was like, "You know what? You're doing it tonight." And he went around and it was super cheesy because it was we were all living together and they went and assembled the chairs and everyone sat in chairs and then they introduced me and I got up there and dude, I had never done stand-up comedy before that moment. All I had ever done that's anything similar to it was tell jokes in front of friends. You know what I mean? And that's really all stand-up comedy is taking what you do in the bar or at the house or whatever and putting it on stage. You know what I mean? And it's a whole different beast because a lot of people who can do that can't do that, And so I did it in jail and I lasted for 67 minutes.
Oh, wow.
My first shot. And it just kept people going. And so I wouldn't say that I'm like a set them up, knock them down kind of joke teller. I'm just a storyteller that has a bunch of funny moments that I can talk about and you know what I mean, and get people to identify. But 67 minutes, and then finally, and at the end of that time, I was like, I've always struggled with the closer. Like I've never had a closer, you know what I mean? So I'm like, all right, guys, done.
That sounds like the perfect closer.
Yep, and I think that's where we end the podcast right here too. Like, Adam, thank you so much for coming on JJ Meets World. If people want to find you, if they want to contact you, if they want to learn more about F5 Ventures, where are they going to go?
There's a bunch of spots. We got a Facebook page, we have Twitter, we have Instagram. Info at f5project.org. f5project.org is our website. So honestly, just Google F5 Project and you'll find me.
Sweet. All right. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Done.
JJ Meets World.
Well, that does it for this episode of JJ Meets World. Folks, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, wherever you consume the podcasts that you love. Throw us a great review while you're at it. And hey, folks, if you head over to patreon.com/JJ Meets World, we really would appreciate a donation towards the running of this podcast. It can be as simple as a cup of coffee a month. It can be as grand as $1,000 a month. Whatever you have. Maybe this is consumed in your car and you think about, gosh, I have driven back and forth to work 50 times while listening to JJ Meets World. I'm going to give them a couple of bucks. It goes a long way. We have hosting fees. I'm a bit of a prima donna. And of course, Tucker, needs all his beard creams. All of this money goes to the things we need to keep the podcast going. So again, patreon.com/JJ Meets World. We also want to give a shout out to the guy who sent us $20 through the mail. That was pretty sweet, and we appreciate it. But if you go through Patreon, it is a lot more legit than sending straight cash through the mail. So you can find out what Tucker Lucas has been up to. He's the producer of every single episode of JJ Meets World by going to the website www.moonbasemaria.com. And if you would like to contact me, the host with the most, JJ Gordon, you can go to linebenders.com. And hey, you can book my improv troupe for one of your holiday gatherings as well. I suppose at this point, this is where we're supposed to wrap things up. But I was thinking I don't like using the term wrap things up because I always think like, oh, what are we going to fill this with shredded lettuce?